Thank you so much for joining us here today. We are going to be exploring how do we move from conflict to collaboration, and in particular, what's a leader's role in that process? I'm Wendy Lowen, and I'm going to be your moderator for our time here today. I'm going to invite you all to pop in the chat a quick hello and let us know where you're chiming in from today. And in just a minute, I'm going to introduce our presenter. But just before I do that, a bit of a heads up in terms of what you can anticipate for our time here together. We're going to have a half hour of presentation. And after that, we're going to move to the opportunity for Eric to respond to some questions. And we're going to save about 15 minutes at the end of our time for that to happen. As the presentation is going on, if you have questions that jump to mind, ideas you want to share, please, let's use the chat, pop those in there. I'll be paying attention to the questions as they appear in the chat. We also have a team standing by that's going to be looking for the questions as they come up. We won't get to answer all of them, but we'll do our best to spend some time answering at least a few of them. It is a real pleasure to introduce Eric Stutzman. Eric Stutzman comes to the topic of conflict with a lot of background and experience in the most positive of the sense. He has over 2 decades of working together with individuals and teams, helping them resolve conflict constructively. Eric is a trained mediator. He is also CEO of the Achieve Center for Leadership and our sister organization, the Crisis and Trauma Resource Institute. He is a friend, a colleague, and has been a mentor in my own leadership journey. So I'm going to turn it over to Eric. Eric.
Hey, thank you for that introduction, Wendy. And it is so good to be with you today as your presenter on this topic of conflict to collaboration. It is a topic that's near and dear to my heart, something I've spent a career thinking about, especially about how a leader impacts or an organization when it comes to conflict. And so today, I want to start you off by thinking a little bit about your journey into leadership and your expectations of a leadership role. And I'm wondering specifically how many of you thought to yourself, I'm going to take on a management role, a supervision role, a leadership role of some sort, because I really love conflict and I want to dive deeply into it. How many of you got into your role and then realized or were surprised by the amount of conflict management that's actually a part of the role of management and leadership? And then think to yourself, were you fully equipped to handle that? Did you have models and ideas and skills that were part of your training to become that leader as you stepped into that role? My hunch is, if you're a bit like me, you probably didn't think too much about that side of leadership and management as you stepped into the role and quickly realized that no matter how much conflict happens in an organization, as a leader, you stand out in the midst of that conflict and you actually do have a role to play. So I want to talk with you through that today, and I want to help you think about your position as a leader and specifically how you position yourself as it relates to conflict and leadership and collaboration. One of the things that many of us struggle with is that we have experienced the downsides of negative conflict resolution. And we sometimes shy away from conflict, or we're not quite sure how to approach it in a way that actually gets us to collaboration. And I'd like to encourage you today to start thinking about conflict as a catalyst for collaboration, that conflict's a key component in any organization's journey to something better than it is today. And so I want to dive in with you on that specific idea today. I want to help you see your role differently, and then I want to help you together with Wendy. We're going to talk about how to prepare your team for healthy conflict resolution so that you can use conflict as a catalyst for collaboration. So let's get started today with a bit of thinking. And I'd encourage you in the chat to type out the types of conflict that are brought to you at work. And nobody's names, but what kinds of conflict tends to get brought to you as a manager, a supervisor or leader in your organization? What do you hear about now that you're in a leadership role? And one of the things that, just from a mechanical perspective with this presentation, the chat's about a 15-second delay from our presentation. So Wendy and I will banter a little bit, or we'll talk a little bit while we ask those chat questions to allow those responses to start to come up on the screen. I'm curious, Wendy, as you think about your role as a leader and journey, just give us an example of a type of conflict that might be brought to you in your role as a director here at Achieve.
Oh, one of the first examples that came to mind, Eric, as you were talking, is where somebody has a disagreement with somebody, they're unsure of what to do with it. And it doesn't matter how big or how small that conflict is. They come to their leader, their manager, their supervisor, and they want some guidance in that. Mm-hmm. And usually, from my experience, it's been in the realm of interpersonal conflict that's come up. Oftentimes it's around misunderstandings where someone did or said something and it bothered me. I wasn't sure what they meant by it. And can you help me think through that? Yeah. Or can you go fix that for me? Yeah. Or will you do something about it?
Right. I don't know what to do with this interpersonal situation. Let's see if there's anything else in the chat now that's coming up in terms of the kinds of things that get brought to leaders.
Yeah, there's a lot jumping up in the chat. Disagreement of responsibilities. There's someone who's noting gaslighting. Somebody, Donna, is saying, we've always done things a certain way, so there's a lot of resistance to change. Mm-hmm. Role clarity is another one. We've got generational gaps and differences. Mm-hmm. Types of conflict, different communication styles. Yeah, we all have our own background and history when it comes to interacting or responding to conflict. Often has to do with our upbringing and our background as well. Cultural differences often lead to, misunderstandings and potentially conflict as well. Mm-hmm. Lots of great things coming up here.
Great. So for you that are listening and viewing this webinar, hold on to that. Think about the types of conflict that you become aware of. And now I want to just add a little bit of information into the picture, and then I'm going to ask you a question about the types of conflict. So we've done a lot of research about workplace culture, what makes great workplace cultures, and what a leader's role in that is. And as part of our research for 2 books that we've released through Achieve, one is called The Culture Question, and the other is called Don't Blame the Lettuce. We did fairly large research projects with both of them, asking what makes a great workplace, what leads to positive team work, what leads to positive leadership, etc. And one of the interesting things that we found was this. Now, this is stated in the negative, but think about what it means in the positive. 81% of people who do not like their workplace also don't have leaders who work to resolve conflict quickly. What does that tell you? If people aren't liking their workplace, it's strongly connected to leaders who don't work to resolve conflict quickly. So if you were to flip that, what does that tell you about your role as a leader? You're now in a leadership position. You hear about a conflict. What it tells me is we need to act. We need to proactively work at dealing with this situation in a positive way. Okay, so that's one thing that we learned in our research. And the second one that I think is equally as interesting is that there was a very strong connection between these 2 statements. Leaders in my organization work to resolve conflict quickly, and people in my workplace deal with conflict constructively. So when leaders work to resolve conflict quickly, it has some sort of spillover effect or connection to people around us dealing with conflict constructively. And I didn't necessarily expect that the speed of a leader's response also has something to do with constructive responses to conflict more broadly in the organization. So now here's your second question to think about in terms of, okay, you've been made aware of a conflict. Now what? What do people want you to do about it? They told you about their conflict. That person's bothering me. I'm struggling with this situation. There's a disagreement in my department. Whatever that conflict is, what are they expecting of you, the leader? What do they want you to do about it? And my guess is you're going to come up with a couple of different kinds of responses here. There isn't a right answer because people have different expectations of their leaders. Now let's see if we can come up with, as a group, a few of the common expectations that people have when they go to their leader with a conflict. What are the possible options? Are you seeing anything in the chat yet, Wendy?
Oh, the first one coming up from L.A. Duke here is to solve the problem.
Solve it. Yeah, let's fix that thing, right?
And we also have Ginger chiming in and saying the same thing.
Fix it.
Let's get it solved. We have some more to solve the problem. Thank you, Brendan. With the way they want the conflict solved. That's interesting. Yes. Judy is saying fix it, talk to the other person so you can make them behave.
Yes.
Jody is saying again, solve it. Brenda, some changes made, something, whatever it is, something needs to change. SAP is saying include the other person in that. Marianne is saying some kind of investigation process involved. And they're coming in, Eric.
Lots of commonality there with, okay, I've told you because I want something to happen. And actually, many people want the leader to do something on their behalf. Sometimes they want them to do something with them, to act on the other person, to do something to the other person, perhaps things like investigations, discussions, etc. There's a lot of fixing it going on. Is anybody saying, this is one I've encountered, I just want you to listen to me. I don't want you to do anything. Just listen, be in a listening ear. It's okay if that's not coming up in the chat, but I bet you some of you out there who are listening to this have had that experience too. Oh, I'm so frustrated. Well, do you want me to do something about that? No. I just wanted to tell somebody about it. There's a variety of possible options that people have here. Some people want you to do something. Some people want you just to listen. Some people want you to even coach them to do something different. The thing is, if you'll notice, the majority of your responses, and this is true in other workshops I've done, are lean toward, I tell you about the conflict because I want your help. I want you to act or do something about it. And what we know from our research is that there is a correlation between a leader acting and having a positive workplace. So I want to talk with you about how a leader acts, because how a leader acts will have an incredible impact on whether that is seen as positive or negative. The first thing I want to show you is something called Karpman's drama triangle. You'll see a triangle pictured on your screen, and it has 3 labels at the corners: victim, villain, and hero. This very simple model and idea comes from a psychologist who wrote about family systems theory. And notice that we often tell ourselves stories about what is happening. And those stories tend to oversimplify a situation. And those stories also tell us how to behave. Ask yourself, what are the typical components of drama? If you think about nursery rhymes or the stories that you hear, like the Little Red Riding Hood story or Peter Pan story or other childhood stories, you'll see them on TV. You'll see these stories enacted in many of the movies we watch. There tends to be 3 central characters in any good drama: the person who is identified as the victim, the person who's been hurt, the person who has a problem that they have to solve or overcome. Then there's the person that acts in a heroic way to help the victim. And then there's the person who tends to create the obstacle, or the villain. This simple narrative is planted deeply in our brains if we've grown up, especially in a Western-oriented society. We will have heard this story over and over and over again. Now, let's put a lens of conflict on this. And let's ask the question, when somebody walks into your office and says, please help me, Barbara from that department is really getting in the way of me doing my work. They've walked in and they've told you a story. Who in this simple narrative are they? I think you're going to say, well, they probably see themselves as the victim of Barbara, who is doing something bad or wrong. And what do they want of you? They want you to be the hero or to act on their behalf. And it's not as though their desire is wrong or bad, but it oversimplifies what's happening in conflict and shuts off our brains because we tend to then follow the script. Well, the victim is helpless and disempowered. What do they need? They need a hero to help them be empowered. They need a hero to ride to the rescue and fix it. And so now somebody walks into your office and says, Barbara's the problem. And you say, you're right. Barbara really should work harder on that. Or let me just go talk to Barbara. And you walk down the hall and you go talk to Barbara. And Barbara sees you walk into her office and you say, could you tell me a bit about the project that's going on between you and the other person? And now all of a sudden, Barbara thinks to herself, who am I in this story? I feel like the victim of the person who told on me, or the victim of the hero. And the hero all of a sudden becomes a villain to who Barbara thought the villain was. And we start to get a mess of triangles starting to develop, because anytime there's a new villain, we need a new hero. We need somebody to rebalance the triangle. I would say this oversimplification is not helpful, and I want to show you what is more helpful, and it's probably something that you may have thought about before and even have policies that direct you in this way in your organization. Our job as a leader is to challenge this narrative by doing the following. Our job as a leader is to say, I'm not going to be the hero, but I am going to act. I'm going to act on behalf of positive conflict resolution. I'm going to act on behalf of my team and my workplace and help the people who are having the conflict see the conflict that exists between them and work on that, rather than working on each other as victims and villains in a narrowly scripted kind of way. So how? What's the way to do that? I want to give you 3 ideas. And before I do so, just a quick unpack of what conflict really is. And quick side note, most conflict is not bullying, and most conflict is not harassment. Most conflict at its heart is one of 3 things. It's disagreement, it's misunderstanding, or it's differences that need to be managed. But it's not bullying or harassment. Bullying and harassment is when somebody else acts intentionally to harm somebody else. And when that happens, it's a different kind of response that's required of the leader. And that's not what we're talking about in this particular session today. What we're talking about in this session today is 90 to 95% of what happens in a workplace, which starts with disagreement, misunderstanding, or differences that need to be managed. So what is conflict really? And I said, let's remember that conflict isn't bad. Conflict is disagreement plus some tension. Where are we going for lunch today? Randy, where do you want to go for lunch? What kind of food would you like?
I want to go to Shorty's for pizza.
You want pizza? I can't eat pizza though, Wendy. I really don't want to go for pizza today. I want to go out to the diner. And now Wendy and I are having a conflict. Now let's imagine we have to go together because we have a meeting. Now let's imagine we only have one car and we want to go to different restaurants. Now there's some tension that needs to be resolved because we can only go to one restaurant. So what do? Disagreement plus tension. We have conflict. Presumably we can resolve this in a healthy way. But maybe some days we can't resolve it in a healthy way. How we resolve the conflict creates all kinds of different results. That's one kind. The second kind of conflict is that perceived incompatibility of goals and ideas. Oh, that we can't work together. We're so different. We have such different ideas. Or maybe even our departments are set up in such a way that they're kind of incompatible. Creative people want all these new software tools, and IT wants to create security and wants to shut down access to tools. And so there's this perceived incompatibility of goals that needs to be managed. And often conflict involves some sort of struggle. Let's ask ourselves though, is that bad? I hope the answer is for you, well, no, right? What can be bad is when we start to say, the reason we have conflict is because the other person is the problem. Their personality is the problem. The way they are in the world is the problem. They're just kind of stubborn. They don't pay attention to detail. They're uncaring. They are, and we start to say the problem is in the person, and we start to act in those ways. That's when we start to see the negative side of conflict start to spiral. So we said in the description of this that we talk about how conflict escalates. And I want to show that to you really quickly. It's not that magical to understand, and all conflict tends to go in this way. We start just by realizing there's a problem. Oh, we have to go to one restaurant, not two. We both want to go to a different restaurant. Okay, well, there's a problem that needs to be solved. And most of the time, we resolve it at that level and conflict does not escalate. Often in an organization, though, or when conflict does escalate, is if people don't solve it quickly and easily at the problem level, they start to create thinking errors, which is simply, well, the problem is Wendy won't listen to my true needs. Wendy is the problem because Wendy is, and I start to ascribe the problem to her character. Meanwhile, for me, I just say, well, my behavior is rationalized. It's perfectly understandable to me, and I'm not the problem here. And that's a thinking error. And when we do that, and we see the other person as the problem, or the problem lies with them, then we tend to go to alliance building. It's when we reach out to the hero, to the manager or the supervisor. And this is where you often hear about it as a leader or as a friend sometimes, right? Oh, somebody is really bothering me. They're the problem. Can you help me? That's alliance building. I get people on my side. And if we don't de-escalate from there, we tend to move toward unhealthy confrontation. My hope is that you as a leader will catch things at that alliance building level. Sometimes you become aware when you're in the meeting and you see it happening live in front of you, but often it's at the alliance building phase. And it's our job to start quickly helping people examine the way they think and push them back into looking at the problem itself. So how do you prevent escalation? Well, one of the things I've noticed as a leader is that as a leader, you tend to be less in the know about conflict. And the bigger the team you lead or the higher up in management you become, you're even further removed from the day-to-day realities of people and the conflict that they're experiencing in the organization. And so there are three things that we want to suggest to you. One, get your organization conflict ready proactively in advance so that people can handle conflict at the problem awareness level and deal with it on their own. And then be ready if it becomes to the level of alliance building or they're seeking the hero, that you know what to do when it comes. One of the things Wendy sometimes says is preparation promotes positive performance. So we want to help you get your teams and yourself ready here. Three things in conflict readiness. We have to make it safe for people to speak up. We have to get our teams curious rather than judgmental. And we have to have practice around how to have healthy disagreement or healthy conflict. And I'll go through each of these in a little bit of detail. And then I'm going to turn it over to Wendy to tell you specifically about an activity that we want to recommend to you on getting your team conflict ready. So number one, how do you create safety for speaking up? If you want people to be able to talk about conflict, people need to know it's okay. So one of the things that we try to say is something like this. It's important that we hear as many perspectives as possible in this meeting. It's important that everybody has a chance to speak up. And as a leader, you watch and you notice who isn't saying anything and you ask them if they might have something to contribute. And then we thank people for speaking up and essentially validate that behavior. And three, sometimes a hard part for a leader, if they don't agree with somebody, is to listen without arguing. Instead, ask them to say something, say what you've heard, and sometimes ask them to say more before you jump in on the conversation. So let's create safety for our teams. Two, we have to create an atmosphere where people can be curious. I wonder if there are any other possible explanations. So when somebody has come to you, they've walked into your office and said, I want you to be the hero here. Barbara's driving me crazy. Our job is to help them to start to think more broadly. Just this last weekend, my daughter came to me. We were at a large event. There were many people there, a bunch of kids running around, a bunch of food. And my daughter says to me, my friend abandoned me for her other friends. And I thought to myself, she abandoned you? And then I realized, as her dad, she's feeling abandoned. But is that the intention of the friend? And so I had to ask the question, oh, well, say more. Well, she wanted to talk to her other friends in the choir. Oh, well, what's that about? Well, they're getting ready to do an announcement later on at the event. Oh, okay. So did she abandon you? Well, you feel abandoned, but was that her intention? Oftentimes, what we feel becomes our reality. If I feel slighted, that person meant to slight me. If I feel abandoned, that person meant to abandon me. If I feel angry, that person meant to make me angry, and that becomes my reality. But often, if we examine it just for a moment, if we have a listener who can say, oh, it's possible they meant to abandon you, but I wonder if there are any other possible explanations, or what else might be happening here? And then if you're in a situation of disagreement, asking questions like, well, what is important to you in this situation? What's most important as a way to resolve this? How would you like to go about that? What are your interests? Or what do you think might be important to them here? Or what do you think they might be thinking about? Just quick word of caution in that last question. You can't ask somebody what might be important to the other person while they're still upset. So you have to listen to them first. You have to ask them to think first, and get them de-escalated a bit before you ask them to take the perspective of the other person. So I want to turn over the next little bit to Wendy. We recently ran an activity with our staff where we practiced disagreeing. Wendy, could you describe that activity for our viewers?
Yes, I absolutely can. But I just have to say, the very first time I saw this PowerPoint slide, it says practice disagreeing. If my mom was in the audience, she would say, Wendy, you don't need any practice disagreeing. And I want to use that as a caveat to what we're talking about here. It's not just the disagreeing and putting it on the table. What it is about how we disagree. How do we share our ideas in a way that is respectful and allows people to feel heard? And as Eric said, we want to create an organization, teams, individuals who were conflict ready, and we need to provide practice so that we can build that skill of conflict capacity. So it's how we disagree that matters. We want to create an environment where people feel safe to share their ideas. That's grounded in curiosity, as Eric said, and respect. So I want to just give you a high-level overview of the activity that we ran with our staff. And we're also going to pop a PDF that outlines the activity in more detail for you in the chat. And we'll also follow that up after our presentation here. So the way that we started the activity was to do a very short teaching on the idea of interest. What's an interest and what's the difference between that and a position? So a position is someone says, I want this, I want to go to Shorty's. An interest is we have to have a meeting where we want to be together. So we talked about the difference between positions and interests. Then we introduced a series of discussion prompts. And Eric, I think you have that on a slide. So relatively easy conversation starters where people will have very distinct opinions or perspectives on the way to proceed. And we asked them to break into small groups of 4 or 5, and then in their group to choose one prompt to start with. And then the process was relatively simple. One person shares their opinion and their perspective on the conversation prompt. And then the group's instruction is to listen without interrupting, and then to ask clarifying questions, to really try and explore what the interests are. And then to repeat that process of asking questions as many times as needed, till the person feels heard, that their interests have been validated, and then to go on to another individual in the group and have them share their opinion with the same process unfolding of asking questions, trying to unearth what the interests are, whether their opinion is the same or not, because we can hold similar opinions or different or same perspectives, but have very different interests that underlie it. And so the goal, this is the important part, it was the how. The goal was not to solve or to fix or to come to a decision. The purpose of this particular skill building activity was simply to practice sharing in a safe space, your opinion, and being met with a group of people who are interested, who are curious, who validate, and to sort through what the interests are. Again, the goal was not to come up with a solution. to the particular question that was asked, but it was to practice listening well and to staying curious and to sharing our opinions. So it's flexing that conflict muscle in a fun and a safe way in terms of practicing. So the promoting positive performance by practicing. So thank you very much. Yeah, and again, the PDF is going to be put in the chat, and we will make sure to follow up to all of you who signed up for the webinar to send that out to you as well. Okay.
Yeah, great. So in sum, this short presentation for you, be on the side of healthy conflict as a leader. Conflict is generative of new stuff. We hire people because they have brains. We want them to speak about what they really think. The more people that speak, the better we can represent a group of people and have what we call collective intelligence do its magic for our organization. So be on the side of healthy conflict, not on the side of the victim and the villain. Usually those roles don't exist. 2, encourage curiosity. What is it that you can do to get people to think beyond their feelings and take the perspective of other people and dig deeper into their interests? And number 3, get your team conflict ready. Are they ready so that when they have something to discuss, they can discuss it in a good way? So we want to turn it over to you now and get your questions about conflict in your workplace. You can respond to the things that we've talked about today. If you'd like further clarification or particular situations, again, leave the details of the particular people out, but feel free to ask your questions. And we will give about 15 minutes for a Q&A time now, and hopefully have some interesting things to talk about. So Wendy, as you start to see questions starting to come up in the chat, you can just read them out, and perhaps you and I can take turns addressing some of those questions. What Wendy didn't say is that she has done advanced training in conflict management as well, and is also an active mediator. So the two of us like to talk about conflict a lot together.
You know, Eric, this isn't a question, but Kara has noted here, it's hard to see the issue when your emotions are high.
Yes.
And is also noted it's important to take a moment. But I think that's really important. And you made mention of this earlier in your presentation, the idea that when people are agitated or escalated, they're angry, whatever the reason is for that, that's not the time to go into problem-solving mode.
Yeah, it's so true. Like you can't get people to think creatively when they are emotionally escalated. So job number 1 of any leader is to listen, and listen well. And it's through listening that people's emotions start to come to a place of calm, and then they can start to consider healthy and helpful ways of handling conflict and taking the perspective of others. Yeah.
Fantastic. So many questions popping up here. What if, from Hayes, thank you, what if the boss is the problem?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. So Hayes, thank you for that. So just notice the wording of the question, the boss is the problem. People perhaps in your organization have started to think about that the problem lies within somebody else. And that is what we describe as level 2 of conflict escalation. The problem is in somebody else, and we often call that a thinking error. It's not to say that the boss isn't doing things that are problematic. The boss's behavior is not helpful. But if we can start to remove that a little bit and say the boss probably has good intentions for the organization overall, possibly they're, have a serious issue, and that's not true. But usually leaders want to succeed and they want their teams to succeed, usually. So if you're starting to see that there's unhealthy behaviors that are generating conflict, it really depends on the size of your organization. I would encourage you to seek the perspective and help of somebody who is perhaps a conflict specialist, can help you think about that in your particular situation. Look for a coach. If your boss is somebody that you trust and you think would want to listen, you could approach them thinking about what's really important to them and speak to that language. I know, boss, that you want to succeed and you want this team to feel healthy. And I'm wondering if a couple of the things that you do in meetings might get in the way unintentionally, and I wanted to ask you about them. That approach can work where you have a good relationship with the boss or there's a fair amount of trust. if trust has been broken, you're hurting or they're hurting, then it's often helpful to get somebody to coach you or to see your situation more fully and help you to think about it more fully. Another question.
Yeah, there's another one. What do you do when there's shifting styles between how conflict is managed, between managers who have different styles of interacting and with the conflict itself?
You want to take it?
I can start, sure.
Yeah.
Well, I think that brings up a really important, larger issue is that leadership teams need to be aligned. There needs to be consistency because when leadership teams are not aligned, people start to feel unsettled, almost insecure within their role and their ability to speak up. So when you talk about a conflict-ready organization, part of that, the starting point is making sure that leaders understand what their role is in conflict and that there's consistency between the way that they respond to their team members and their staff.
Yeah, excellent point. Leadership alignment matters a lot. Now, let's say you're in an organization where that doesn't exist. Again, without knowing your particular organization, it's hard to give you particular advice. In general, observing something and asking about it is much better than observing and accusing. So observing and asking might be, I've noticed that, Supervisor 1, Supervisor 2, and Supervisor 3 each have different ways of handling situations like, X, whatever the situation is. And sometimes I'm thinking that might create confusion for others. It does for me. And I'm wondering if we could have a discussion or if the three of you could have a discussion about that. Again, like how much trust and care is there between you and those supervisors? Could you approach one of them and observe and ask them if they might want to approach the other supervisors? Is there a central figure in your organization, like a human resource person that's somewhat removed? So without knowing your organizational resources, it's a little difficult to know exactly what to say other than observe and be curious, think about your interests, and see if there's a way to approach the conversation from there and from the organization's best interests at heart as well.
Thanks, Eric. In the chat earlier, and more than once, there was the comment made around, what if people come to you and they want it to be anonymous? They don't want you to go and make anyone aware that they've had the conversation with you. They want to remain, and one of the words was, they want to remain anonymous.
Yeah, so it's sort of like, go do something, but don't get me involved in this. It's a little bit like, here's a situation. I'm going to put some handcuffs on you as the leader, and now go deal with it. And that's tricky for leaders. I know that you face that question sometimes, Wendy. Yeah. You've done a lot of consulting where that question's been asked. I'm wondering if you want to take a first look at that, or?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, Eric, I can actually just quote you from years ago. I distinctly remember you saying, I will not be a message bearer was sort of a memorable way that our role as a leader is not to run around and bring messages, because for one, it's very exhausting, and our job then just exponentially increases if we become seen as the fixer at work. And you also made the comment, which I think is really valuable in terms of thinking about conflict. Early on, if someone comes to you and starts relaying a story or, speaking about a situation, a very helpful question I think to ask is, what are you looking what are you looking to me for? What's my role here in supporting you? And I think it's just a small little nuanced shift where we're not going to be doing things to people. We're not going to be doing things for people. We're there. You use the word catalyst. We're there as a catalyst. Catalyst speed things up. They remove obstacles or barriers. They don't apply more heat and pressure. We don't fix. We don't, run around and make things better. What we're doing is we're supporting so that we're building conflict capacity.
Yeah, exactly. The role of the leader is not the role of fixer. The role of the leader is the role of helping others figure out what to do with the information that they carry. Once you hear about something as a leader, you are no longer neutral. There is no such thing as neutrality. When you hear a story, it acts on your brain, it acts on your way of thinking, it enters into the stories you carry with you. You can't remain unbiased, you have a bias. And so you have to say to the person, look, I know that you want action here. Let's play this out a little bit. If I were to take up your message and go speak on your behalf, what if I didn't carry it in the way that you would want? What if I carried it in a way that created more anger in the other person? What if it made it worse? What if I'm not the right person to do that? What other resources do you have here? What are ways that you can see to handle the situation? Where do you have power here? Where do you have ideas? What's important to you? And so you examine that hero role a little bit. Now, I did say at the beginning of the presentation that it's a little bit different if somebody comes and says, I'm being bullied, I'm afraid for my life or my job or my sanity or whatever it might be. And then we do play a bit of a different role, but that's not conflict. That is something that's different from conflict. That is active harming another human being. And then as a leader, we need to step into a role that's more of protection and containment and de-escalation, and we might bring other resources in to help us with that.
Yeah, and Eric, you're touching in on a question earlier was asked in the chat. When do you bring HR in? And this would be an example potentially when there's large power differentials where you would want to bring in additional support.
Yeah, exactly. And human resources in an organization with 50 people is completely different from human resources in an organization with 1,000 people. The number of people in human resources, the skill sets that are present in human resources. Sometimes a human resource person is really good at payroll and benefits, but they don't really know much about conflict. Sometimes they know a lot about human dynamics, but they don't know a lot about payroll because somebody else in the department handles payroll. So we have to think about what kind of human resource person am I talking about here? And without knowing your organization, it's hard to know specifically what to say, other than we draw other resources in when we are stuck. And when we ourselves are stuck as a leader and need to deal with a conflict, our job is to go to somebody and say, can you provide me some coaching? I'm not coming to you to be the hero here. I'm coming to you to help me think about this and figure out ways to move forward that might be helpful. I'm not asking you to carry my message. I'm asking you to help me think about it, because we don't want to disempower ourselves either.
Thank you, Eric. We are coming to the end of our time here. There are a lot of great questions that are coming up. I want to wrap things up here and say just a great big thank you. Thank you for your time, for your attention, for jumping in on the chat. We are very, very grateful to work together with you on creating great places of work. So thank you. There were questions we didn't answer. I would really encourage you to check out our additional resources on our website. We have a lot of blogs. There are free webinars in addition to this one that you can watch and access that potentially will provide you with a little more guidance in some of the questions that we weren't able to get to. And if you're interested, please sign up for our newsletter and we can keep you up to date on what is happening at Achieve.
Yeah, Wendy, you and I have both written a fair number of blogs, articles on conflict management and leadership that are available on our website through the blog portal on our website. You and I are also co-hosts of a podcast with one of our colleagues, Chris, where we often touch on topics related to conflict, leadership, and workplace culture. And that's another way to get more information. And if you have questions we didn't answer, we'd like you to, we'll keep track of what was in the chat here. We may address them specifically in an upcoming podcast, an upcoming blog, so you can look for them there. We encourage you to write into us and ask us to address questions straight up in our podcast that we may not have gotten to today. So send them to our info email address if you've got questions that you'd like to see us address in another format sometime soon. And you'll notice that one way to stay involved with us is to sign up for our newsletter, which you're going to get. There's different newsletters that we have. Some are connected to resources, blogs, podcasts, training opportunities, and those sorts of things. So please do that. And we'd love to stay in touch. Also, you're going to find Wendy and me on LinkedIn, and we like to connect with people there. So feel free to reach out there and connect with us further in that space.
Yes. Thank you again for joining us in creating great workplaces where people can like where they work. We at Achieve believe people deserve to like where they work. And let's move to being catalysts to supporting people move through conflict. Thank you all.